So the game is set in a post-apocalyptic world, but it's a post-apocalyptic world that hasn't been done before. It's a world after these schlocky sci-fi films like Them and Giant Spider films have ended, and spiders have taken over the world. And they've covered the entire world in this web and eaten all the humans as flies, and the players play the few surviving humans hiding amongst the broken houses that are too small for the spiders to squeeze in, and sneaking around from place to place, trying to survive in this world and interacting with the different factions that might still live there, or trying to sneak past a giant spider sitting on top of a car. And
not too long ago, I got a zine in the mail that I had backed on Kickstarter. And after I read Webworld, I knew I needed to do a review of it immediately for YouTube and Twitch. I sit down with its creator, Willow Jay, and explore the origin of a game I found fresh with an interesting mechanical twist. We talk about his process and go over the game he currently has on Kickstarter, Liminal Space. Stick around to the end when he explains to me why he loves that new video game, Elder Scrolls. This episode is made possible because of the support of the patrons of Third Floor Wars, so a big thanks to all of you and some of our newest patrons like Fabian Picart, Sam Ius, Peter Thomas, William Payne, Isaac Turton, and Adas. Okay, sit back, relax, and enjoy my time with Willow.
Do you love to unplug and play games around the table? Greetings, friends and floorheads, to Tabletop Talk from Third Floor Wars. If you love tabletop gaming, you are in the right place. Listen as Craig delivers in-depth discussions and interviews with game designers, creators, insiders, and experts. Learn from the people making and playing the role-playing, miniature, and board games you love.
My guest is Willow Jay, creator of tabletop role-playing games like Webworld and Liminal. He is an independent TTRPG writer and designer. He has come out swinging with 2 successful Kickstarters under his belt and several more projects to follow. Willow, welcome to the Third Floor.
Hi, it's good to be here.
So before we dive into the games you make and how you make them, we've got to get your origin story. So there was a day, Willow, where you knew nothing about role-playing games. You didn't know you could grab a sheet of paper, throw some stats down, roll some dice, and pretend to be somebody else. And then it was presented to you for the first time. Can we go back to that moment?
Yeah, so I think it's actually annoyingly started with the 90s film Dungeons & Dragons.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's a first. That's great.
Yeah. I saw that film and it was terrible. And I'm really into film, and I went to university for film, and so I'd always look up everything behind the background of a film, and I realized, it's based on a game. So I went and looked up this game, and I was at the UK version of high school at the time, and I realized actually there's a club here that plays this game. So I joined up as a player, and that's how I got my start. I mean, that film.
Okay, so I want all the listeners to understand something, that if it was not for the Jeremy Irons Dungeons and Dragons movie, we would have no Webworld. So I don't want to hear any more people complaining about that movie.
Yeah.
So you find out about it. You find out there's a local club at school. The first time you sit down, how was it presented to you, and how did you consume it or digest it all?
The people there were really helpful. They more ran through the character creation process for me than me running through it myself, and generated a character and gave me a bunch of illegally downloaded copies of sheets and and this was 3rd edition, which is not too long ago, but they presented like a map and all these minis, and I think I'd sort of been aware of Warhammer at the time.
Right.
So I was like, this is really cool. It's like Warhammer, but you can do anything you want. And I obviously played an edgelord character, because we all do as our first one.
Whose parents died.
Yeah, whose parents died. I think my character killed their parents.
And so
I've got a little bit better.
A little bit better. So for you, it sounds like, you know, your touchstone to kind of get into it is understanding how miniature games like Warhammer and stuff like that, and then realizing it's just a bigger version of that. So you start playing D&D. What was your first non-Dungeons and Dragons game, and how did that get in front of you?
Oddly, Morkborg.
Okay, really?
There was a period where all I knew was D&D.
Right.
For a very long time, and I had no idea about. I think I vaguely kind of was aware of Pathfinder and Cyberpunk, and I'd kind of like see them around, but go, oh, that's way too complicated. I'll stick with the really simple one, D&D.
Right.
Is obviously completely opposite. And then Morkborg came out, and I'm really into horror. And I just saw the graphic design and really sort of horrible colors are my thing. So I saw the graphic design for Morkborg, and I was like, okay, I need to see this. So I bought it, and it made me realize that actually it's so much more simple, and there are so many more simple games out there than D&D. So I just started absorbing all these games. I think I played like I just went for a period where every week I'd run a new game, because I was DMing for D&D, so I was just like absorbing all of them and throwing them at my horror, like at my my poor play group, who had to learn new rules every week. I think we played Babes in the Wood at one point. God, what else did we play? The 2000 AD Judge Dredd tabletop.
Wow, very nice.
The obviously Cyberpunk. Just yeah.
So I'd be curious, as you're going through this game of the week process, is there any game that either for you or you and your table that kind of blew everybody's mind, where it coming from D&D, and you're going through and you're playing this game, then that game, then this game, then that game? Can you think of a game that, like, when it was over, everybody at the table was like, oh, holy shit?
Yes. So Monster of the Week we ran for about 6 weeks, because it was so simple and there was barely any combat involved. It was so role-play orientated that we just loved it. And I ended up writing like a whole story around it, and that one just kept going for quite a while. Yeah,
it's funny. Sansa's take on Apocalypse World was one of the first ones, right? Very early incarnation of it, and his is very interesting. So I've run a ton of games, right? And people listening have run tons of games, but then there's a next filter down, which is at some point you get the dumb idea that you want to make games. And just, it's the thing. Life isn't hard enough. Right. But I'd be curious, where did that come from and where did it start? Is that, I mean, obviously you're a creative person based off of, what we've already talked about, but when does that bug go? Like, I think I want to make something.
When I was trying to run lots and lots of games, I tried to run Gumshoe. I read through Gumshoe over and over again, and I just couldn't click with the mechanics. So I decided, what, screw it, I'll just write my own mechanics for a non-combat based detective style game. And that's when I wrote the pool system that you talked about in Webworld. So I was like, okay, so you guys have this pool of D6 dice, and you have to use the dice for rolls, but also if you get hurt, I'll take one of the dice away, and if you succeed on a roll, I'll give you a dice back. Actually, the original version didn't have that I'll give a dice back, but then my players complained they didn't have enough dice, so I thought, okay, fine, have a dice. And yeah, I ran a whole campaign with that system and realized that, it's just a really good system, so I kind of lodged it away in the back of my mind for future endeavors.
Oh, that's cool. And when looking back on it, though, because it's one thing, to kind of, piece it together, right? And you want to get this game to the table. You have a hard time grunking Gumshoe. And was there a moment as you were like playing with this system, you're running this detective or investigative game, where you realized, like, I'm onto something here, like there's something going on here that I need to explore some more?
I think so. I mean, I've still got that campaign kind of laid out as a game that could be kind of have the graphic design for and done, and I kind of put it in that way because I thought maybe at some point in the future I'll stick it out there. But at the time I wasn't really, I went through so much to try and be a filmmaker, that I was still plugging away at that, and there was no other kind of industry in my mind that I was going to delve into. So I was still, writing scripts and making films, and like I didn't have time for anything else.
So let's go back then. So you've got, I mean, literally the bones of what becomes Webworld mechanically, right? You've got that, and you've played that in another scenario. I go to the Willow Museum of game design, right? And I go to the section of the museum on Webworld. What is the first exhibit that explains to me when Willow first got the idea, the concept of Webworld?
So I like to sneak into abandoned buildings and take photos. It's called urbexing. I do it all the time. Around where I live, there's a lot of wide open green land and a lot of really old houses that have been abandoned because the bank foreclosed or because the people had to move off the land. And I like to sneak into them and take photos and edit up the photos and put them up on my Instagram. And I'm a really big fan of Trevor Henderson, creator of Siren Head, and the way he does his art, where he kind of edits a creature into the back of these creepy photos. So I thought I'll have a stab at that. And for some reason, I landed on like wide landscape shots of these abandoned houses, and then like these big spider feet kind of coming down out of the sky onto the ground. And I just kind of like threw web over everything and realized, oh, this looks really cool. And I did that for about 5 or 6 photos, and then didn't make an RPG out of it, and kind of went, okay, cool, they're done. And posted them somewhere and put them in a file. And then down the road, I backed a game called They Feed on Fear by Alexi.
I'm not familiar with that game.
It's a very good game. It's a very good system. It's not got anything to do with Webworld in terms of mechanics or feel. It's just that kickstarted me making them. It's about you play as a creature akin to Pennywise or Freddy Krueger, and you're in a group of different players, and you have to terrorize a small town written by the creator.
Nice.
And kind of feed on the fear, and the more fear you get, the more XP you get, the more you level up your abilities. Great game. And so I backed that, and I went into his Discord and started chatting to him and the other people playing the game. And out of the blue one day, he messages me and goes, hey, you've got some really good ideas. Do you want to make a game together? And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean,
that's cool.
You've got this massively successful Kickstarter, and I'm just some random nobody, but okay. So we started workshopping ideas, and that's how we were workshopping Liminal. But over the course of that, I was like, hang on a second, I have like all these ideas kind of that I filed away. I've got these like spider drawings, I've got this pool mechanic, I've got these other things that I didn't really talk about that are just kind of all put away in folders. I could just combine them all together. So I did that. And then I took what I saw from Morkborg, because Morkborg really kind of blew my mind open in that RPGs don't need to be uniform in their presentation. The book itself can be like a piece of art.
Yeah.
And be really interesting and fun to read. It doesn't need to be massive amounts of tables and info, just all put in paragraphs with nothing else to kind of read through, which I still like those, but it was just really interesting to me that Morkborg kind of threw that out the door. So I started putting together Webworld, and one day I just went, screw it, and hit go on the campaign. And there was actually zero planning behind where I put it or what month of the day I put it. I just built it up and went, you know what, it's ready to go, and hit go.
And it funded, and it was a good success. And it's funny, I go back and think about it, because that's obviously the first time I came across you, as it popped up in my Kickstarter feed, and I immediately not bookmark. I think you watch it or follow it, right? I was like, this is interesting, but I need to kind of digest a little bit more. And I came back like a week later, and I just started reading about it, and I realized there was things in this game that I'd never seen before, at least not this exact way. So I backed it. I mean, it was not expensive, right? For RPGs. And I got to tell you, not to blow a little bit of smoke here, but Willow, I was amazed. I thought it was very, very clever, which is, of course, why I reached out and I wanted to talk to you. But there's some people that are watching that haven't seen my flip through live stream of the game and know nothing of it. So can we give them a quick overview of the game before we dig a little bit deeper?
Sure. So the game is set in a post-apocalyptic world, but it's a post-apocalyptic world that hasn't been done before. It's a world after these schlocky sci-fi films like Them and Giant Spider films have ended, and spiders have taken over the world, and they've covered the entire world in this web and eaten all the humans as flies, and the players play the few surviving humans hiding amongst the broken houses that are too small for the spiders to squeeze in, and sneaking around from place to place, trying to survive in this world and interacting with the different factions that might still live there, or trying to sneak past a giant spider sitting on top of a car. And do you want to talk about the mechanics or just the
let's do an overview of the mechanics, because I'm going to dig into them, so please.
Okay, so the like I mentioned, the game uses this pool system. So every player starts out with a class, and they pick this class that has different skills, and the class is given a pool of D6 dice, or it's D8 dice in this game. And whenever they make a check, so whenever they use one of their skills, which is locked into their class, they'll roll any amount of D8 dice from this pool, and it's completely up to the player how many they roll, and they have to try and beat a certain threshold. So there's sort of failure, mixed success, success, perfect success. And if they succeed, or if they get any form of success, they'll get one of those D8 dice back to their pool. So if they only roll one, they get that one back. If they fail, those dice are gone. They have a max in their pool, but they have to record that they've now taken those dice out of their pool. And the character sheet has actually got a little space where you can stack the D8 dice on it. So they just take it off the sheet. Any other player can help them by putting one D8 dice towards it, but if the player helps them, they don't get a dice back. So it's all about just actually making physical out-of-game bonds with the other players. So they'll want to help you rather than them actually getting something from it. There's no combat in the game whatsoever, because all the spiders, they're indestructible. They're an unkillable enemy, and they're actually more of this sort of ever-encompassing fear, this danger, rather than an actual enemy to be fought or snuck around. The second mechanic in this game is so going back to the pool mechanic, when I play tested it, the players described it as a roguelike in tabletop RPG form, because the second you level up, and leveling up is just linked to surviving an encounter, you get your pool refilled and you get an addition to your max pool. And so you either die really quickly in the first sort of encounter, or you start getting stronger and stronger and stronger until something does take you down. And it just feels like this roguelike system, almost. Like it's really easy to jump in straight away and then die straight away, or just keep going for a really long run. And just the only thing I'm going to add in there, if I could, Willow, real quick, is when you run out of dice. So it is a tangible resource, and you're exhausted, right? So it's not necessarily you died, but you're taken out of the game. And if everybody gets to no dice, then that's it. We're done. TPK, it's over. But I thought it was really, really interesting, Willow, to have this push and pull resource mechanic. And for the people that were playtesting and players that have played it since, what do you see happening? So what do you see players doing in the game as far as how they manage that and making the decisions like, yeah, I'm going to throw 3 dice at this? Yeah, so obviously when you run out of dice, you are exhausted, you get knocked out. I see a lot of people in the playtest and past the campaign, they'll look at something like a simple like climb up to a window, because there's a fallen skyscraper and they want to climb through the skyscraper, and there's a climb up to the window and they have to roll some sort of strength check to pull themselves up. But they've only got 2 dice left in their pool, and they go, well, I could try and climb up this, but I'm too exhausted. My character's too exhausted. I have 2 little dice to try and attempt this. So instead, I'm going to try and circumnavigate this skyscraper, which it opens up more role-playing for the GM or the world weaver to the players, and it expands this world rather than them just overcoming the obstacle or throwing themselves at the obstacle till they overcome it.
That's neat. And the next piece, and I think this is where you're heading to, is how the threat works. So to reinforce what you said, we've got these spiders. There's no fighting them. This is not Monster of the Week. This is not Dungeons and Dragons, right? We've got a threat out there that kills you. That's it. There's nothing you can do about it. But how it's handled, I thought was very, very interesting, Willow. So can we talk about the mechanics of the spiders in the web world?
Yes. So there's this mechanic I added to the game called the Webscape. So the Webscape is I was playing a board game, a card game called Let's Summon Demons.
Good name.
And it's this game where you have a bunch of characters that you kind of bring out as cards, and every turn you have to roll 2 dice, and if any of the numbers on that dice match character, that character card activates and has some sort of effect. And then multiple cards can activate around the board, including other players' cards. Like if you have a character who activates on a 12 and the other player has a card that activates on a 12, they both activate. And I thought that was a really cool mechanic because it keeps everyone doing something at all times and constantly looking at something at all times. And I thought, as a GM, sometimes people are just making checks and I'm just reacting to them making checks, whereas like instead I could be doing something else in the meantime. So I added this mechanic in called the Webscape, where basically whenever a player enters an area, the GM decides how big the area is, looks at the graph of how big the area is, and then rolls a certain amount of D8 and then saves those numbers. And then anytime any player rolls any dice in that area, if they roll a 2 and the 2 is on the Webscape, they increase the spider getting closer to the players in this graph that raises up and up and up like a ticking clock.
Mm-hmm.
And it's meant to represent the players kind of nudging a web that the spider happens to be monitoring at the time, and the spider going, oh, there's something here, and moving closer to where the players are. And you kind of describe it via this table that goes, oh, the web starts to shake, or you hear some sort of crashing in the distance. And that ends with the spider being on top of them and not necessarily knowing they're there at that point, because everyone's meant to be wearing this kind of white clothing to kind of blend in with the web. But every time they roll a dice up like past that point, they'll nudge a web and the spider will attack them and bite them or stab them with a leg. And every time they take damage, they remove a dice from their dice pool. So they actually get weaker physically as they get attacked. So they can't do things that they thought they'd be able to do if they were attacked. And I've actually got this spider table at the end of the game that adds all these different spiders in. They've all got different mechanics that kind of interact with the players in certain ways. I think my favorite is the Black Widow, that sort of the first time it attacks you, you're not poisoned, and it nullifies you doing strength rolls to a certain extent. Yeah. And sorry, also the death mechanic I was quite proud of.
Yes.
So when you die, or when you run out of dice in your dice pool, if you're in an encounter with a spider at that point, the spider then retreats instantly. It takes its prey, and it takes the player that just died back to its spider's nest, and that then becomes a mini quest for the players to go and rescue that player or cut their losses, and the player make rolls a new character. And if they do, that player character now becomes this kind of spider zombie host thing that is in the book, which has a similar table.
And the hosts are very interesting too, but they're very zombie-like, right? They're kind of like a spider-themed zombie feel, which adds another layer to it. And then you make a very good note in the game to talk about, a classic trope of zombie films, which is the real monster is the other people, right? And you talk about how, that is a tool for the GM and can be played up. So I've got a huge question for you. And I haven't played Webworld yet. I'm going to be busting it out here soon for my locals. And there's part of me that wants to roll these dice in the open. And I want all my players to know that 2, 4, and 6 are bad news, right? Another part of me wants to hide it and make it completely narrative. I would imagine in playtest both were done. What do you think is more effective? What do you think creates a better table?
In the playtest, only one was done actually, because I didn't actually think of a way of I didn't think of showing the players that there was a number. So I hid them at all points, and just use that as a tool as a GM to describe to players how the world is getting more dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then as players, they catch on and go, oh, okay, so I just nudged a web and something's getting closer. Okay, it's getting closer and closer and closer. And I think part of the fun of that was the players kind of working out on their own what numbers might be the numbers that they're triggering, because they were aware of the mechanic, but they weren't aware of which was being rolled. Which it sort of created this kind of nervousness to roll a dice because they weren't sure if they were going to get the number and they weren't sure what the number would be.
Right.
But that's completely up to you as a GM. You can keep that open if you want, and that might create more tension. It's just the way that I intended it to be was for it to be hidden.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that, and I won't obviously until I give it a rip. But I do think it's very interesting because that was my first instinct was because and maybe I missed it, but I don't know how prescriptive you are in the rules about that, whether it's hidden or not. I can't remember whether you state that as a directive in the rule set or not. And if you do, I missed it. Part of me, like you said, I love that idea of you've got this another, it's not like you're hiding the mechanic, right? But there's this other level of like, what are the numbers? How many numbers are there? Right. And I would assume your players understand that they hit a number because what you're describing, right? So there's a meta understanding of that. And then there's the other part of me that's like a little bit more like John Harper, like, let's put it all out in front of you. And 2, 4, and 8 are, so it'll be interesting to play it through. In the iteration process, a game changes. And from my understanding, for a lot of creators, there's the nobody sees it part of the iteration where you're just kind of by yourself and you're working through things. And then there's the iteration from the table where you introduce it to some friends and, you work out some things, maybe a final play test with a much broader group, which you may or may not participate in, then the game is done. If I were to break into your house, Willow, and grab your notebook where you first started working out Webworld, and then go grab the beautiful zine that I bought and put them next to each other, what didn't change?
So initially, I did not have the players get a dice back because I was umming and ahhing on if I should do that or not, because when they finish an encounter, they level up anyway and they get all these dice back. But I found that the players, sometimes an encounter wouldn't warrant a level up, and B, the players were sometimes just throwing all their dice at something and then failing and dying. So I added that back in to the rules from the original iteration with the kind of gumshoe cyberpunk game I run. And also the hosts weren't a thing. Initially I just had insides were always safe, and then I decided actually sometimes they need a danger inside, otherwise they're just going to kind of stay inside at all times.
Right.
And so I added in this kind of spider zombie type thing to make it worse for the players inside, and just add in this ever imposing danger. But it didn't. Other than that, it didn't change a lot from conception to table. It kind of just stuck with its guns and worked, I guess.
That's good. Well, and this is a good thing, not a bad thing. It's not a complicated game, right? We covered the mechanics of it very, very quickly. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. It allows you to focus on the play itself. And I really like how much freedom I think the table has. And I would imagine the two tables playing Webworld could be playing two very different games, even though at the core, they're the same. As you're working through it though, Willow, at what point do you put the pencil down and go, it's ready? And how did you know that? Or did it just gradually creep up on you?
I knew that after playtesting. So I did playtesting with two different groups. The first group had some interesting points to change, and then the second group, they were really thoroughly enjoying it, and they just had a few little things to change, and I changed those few little things and just kind of went, right, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Done. I think, from then on, I just kind of focus on the design work. I have a terrible habit of designing the whole book and then playtesting because I like designing so much.
Right.
And when I play test, I want to be able to show the players, like, hey, look, here's the rules, and it looks really nice on this page. Not here's the rules, and it's kind of
don't change them.
Yeah, yeah, that does kind of be a problem sometimes.
That's funny. I understand the excitement of doing that, though. That's good. So, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about his next game, which is his first game, and that is Liminal. We'll be right back.
This is Sean. You may have heard of me from such movies as Brett and Sean Go to Illinois, 2 Motorcycles, 1 Stick of Dynamite, and Gaming and BS. What kind of RPG podcast is that? After my NFTs were stolen, I decided to become a patron of Third Floor Wars. The content is great and it costs me less than a good shot of liquor. So consider becoming a patron. It may just land you your next big role. Head over to patreon.com/Third Floor Wars. Tell Craig Sean sent you.
If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
Like I said, I found you through Kickstarter, right? I get the game. I don't know. I mean, I buy a lot of zines. I just love reading, love reading role-playing games. And yours clicked with me enough that I, did the live stream flip through for it. And then you and I got talking. But it's interesting to me that you're like, hey, Craig, I've got another game coming out. That comes out. And I'm like, son of a bitch, I'm going to back this one, too, because this is really interesting and has ideas that I haven't really seen. So before we dive into Liminal, let's, again, give a quick overview, and then we're going to just kind of dig into it.
Okay, so Liminal is, it's Liminal space, it's Liminal underscore, and then the space, the underscore is the space.
So you call it Liminal space?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, sorry.
There's an RPG called Liminal.
Yep, I've interviewed them. Yep.
Yeah. So Liminal Space is it's this map making game, and there's no classes for it or combat again. You kind of really play yourself, and you're thrown into this ever changing liminal space of rooms that are just small sort of vignettes of horror, iconography, and unsettling imagery. As you and the other players with you explore, kind of moving from door to door. And it's all completely randomized. So we've got hundreds of these rooms that we've all handwritten that you roll on this. You kind of pick from several tables, and then you roll D100 on these tables, and then whenever you walk into a room, you roll on the door dice, and you kind of add a door to all the walls that get a door dice on them, and then you're just exploring, and we didn't have any instance where there was a dead end and that was it. But we did put in a rule just in case, like if you have no more rooms to explore, that's it, you're done, you lose. And as you explore, you're trying to find an exit, and we've sort of hardwired exit mechanics into certain rooms within these massive tables, but you'd have to come across those rooms, and sometimes they even kind of require a puzzle or a previous room to have been rolled. So then there's a door with a key, but the key's not in that room; it's in another room. And then on top of that, we've got these entity tables where, again, we've got hundreds of these different entities which appear if a player interacts with anything in the room. And this creepy creature kind of drops down from the ceiling or rises up from the floor, and then the players have to run out of the room. And it's up to the player to determine where everything is. And they're meant to have a massive piece of graph paper. This is very much a physical game, but you could do this with Roll20. Is that the name of the website?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you could do it with the VTT. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But physically, it feels great when you have this massive piece of graph paper and the players physically have to scribble their notes into these little boxes. and kind of draw in these rooms as they kind of explore. On top of that, we've got this mechanic, the fatigue mechanic, where a player can get to 100 fatigue and they'll die. But I think it's 100 fatigue. I need to look back at the rules. But you roll this D. I think it is. Yeah, it is. You roll this D100 dice, and if you get above your fatigue, you succeed in a fatigue check. And the fatigue check encompasses everything in the game. It's this incredibly simple, right, make a fatigue check, And moving from room to room increases your fatigue because you're physically getting tired as you explore this space. And carrying an item increases the amount of fatigue you gain when you move from room to room. And if you roll above your fatigue, you fail the fatigue check. It just means that the more tired you are, the more likely you are to fail a check because you're getting physically tired. You can't do these things that you're trying to do. And for instance, the entities that appear, whenever they appear, they have a fatigue damage like linked to them as an entity, and you always make the same fatigue check to escape them to get to the next room. But if you fail, they'll do something specific. So it might be roll a d8, gain that much fatigue. It might be gain 30 fatigue because this is a really bad entity. It's just it's this really fun mechanic. I mean, watching players roll a d100, especially if you have a d100, and then. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, so there's a couple things. One, and I have not looked at the rules yet. The only thing I know about the game so far is what's on the page, and then what you just talked about. So it sounds like there's that same survival theme that we see in Webworld, right? And you're not trying to save the village here. You're just trying to stay not dead. You're trying to stay alive. And it sounds like it also has a bit of that grind feel to it, in a good way, not a bad way, right? That you're just getting worn down, and that exhaustion as well. But the other thing that I think, and like I've seen that elsewhere, right? That concept is not new. And honestly, I mean, I see and feel that in Webworld a little bit. But I thought it was interesting how important the mapping piece is to this, and that you flat out say this is a mapping RPG. Where does that come from, Willow? Why is that? Because this could be all theater of the mind. We could not draw on anything, right? I can say you got 4 doors, you go through this door. Okay, great. Let's roll on the table. Why is it so critical that it is called that, and that you make that such a centerpiece?
I think it's because it's entirely up to the players to remember what is in each room. So, like as a GM, they have a key. They just write down, right, room 1, which is the first room that is rolled, entity 240. And they know what's in that room. If a player is exploring this space and they've gone hundreds of rooms on, they don't remember what's in room 1. So it is entirely up to them to map it physically. Because if they're trying to remember it in the theatre of the mind, they're like, how am I meant to remember 100 different rooms that I've walked through? And they like so the players, I think, get this kind of this like exciting feeling about mapping out all these different kind of squares, and you get to see the different shapes of them as well, and they lock all in together as this facility, which changes every time. And also I think it kind of harks back to the kind of the feel of the game, this like I guess like industrial horror kind of, the blueprints of rooms and buildings, and the way we look, making the book look is this kind of like company booklet with all of this kind of redacted info, and it's very SCP inspired, obviously.
Nice.
And it just like having something physically in front of them that they can look at and write onto it. It feels like this kind of document almost that they're making. And the idea we have going for the game is the SCP guide is something made by a previous group exploring, and they're now re-exploring and making a new guide because it's a whole new set of rooms.
Interesting.
And then we even have this little mechanic where if you want to, you can then reuse that map, and they'll try to redecipher their notes as new players, or you can hand it to a whole new group, and they'll try and make their way through these rooms, and you know exactly what's in those rooms because you've written the key down.
Right.
And I think the redoing kind of aspect is important to the map making.
That's interesting, Willow. Now, when we talked about Webworld, you talked about how you bounced off of some of the feedback and play testing, right? And there was mechanics that you had abandoned that because of that feedback you brought back, and there's tweaks and changes you made based off of watching people play the game. What have you seen for Liminal Space where that's the case? Where you have come across things as it's hit the table and you say, you know what? This made complete total sense in my head, but now that I'm seeing it played, here are some changes I'm going to make.
So item mechanics were a thing that we kind of discussed back and forth quite a lot, and they kind of were quite interesting when they hit the table. So
what type of mechanics?
Items.
Oh, items. Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Sorry. So the physical aspect of picking up items and using items, there wasn't any kind of incentive past Theatre of the Mind use of mechanics, of items, using them in rooms, because obviously there's no combat, so picking up a stick doesn't have any point, almost. So we had to add in these mechanics after I played, because players were kind of, they were picking up all these items, but then they didn't really have a use for them, past food, which reduced fatigue. So we had to add in these mechanics of like, okay, so you can abate an entity, you can put a stick underneath a door handle, and then that entity can't move through that door because it's a physical entity, but you lose the item, and then we had to give sort of a bonus to doing that. So we made it so that doing that reduces your fatigue, so because you feel physically happier that this thing isn't chasing you anymore, and then that gives players an incentive to use these items. And that was kind of a hard one. We kind of had to discuss back and forth of how are we going to do this. Because at first we just kind of said, okay, so using an item just gives you some fatigue back. But then, I mean, players could just
pick up and drop off, right?
yeah, pick it up and throw it at the wall, and then they get some fatigue back.
Right. So what was different for you? Or what I mean, while we're talking, the game isn't out yet, right? So I shouldn't say past tense. What is different? What is different as you worked through the process of this game, from concept to iterations to even running the Kickstarter? What's different about this for you versus Webworld?
So this one is being printed by Exalted Funeral.
She's awesome. She's so awesome.
Yeah, it's really great working with them. So because it's being printed by them, Webworld was very much a me kind of concept. I didn't print it with anyone. It is now being printed with Exalted Funeral, so you can get physical copies there post the Kickstarter. But I approached them while the Kickstarter was still running, and because of that, I used a local printer, and I physically walked up to the printers and got all the books, and came back and hand packaged all the books and sent them off myself. Yeah, it wasn't.
Can I ask how many things you mailed? How many issues were there that you actually mailed?
It was 142 copies in the end. And because customs has slightly changed in the UK, I printed off all the labels for all the backers, and I made that document in Excel and printed it all, and then I printed off 114 copies of my return address and stuck it on the back, and I went up and they went, right, you need to take this custom sticker and put it on each individual package and hand write your address into each custom sticker.
Oh my God.
For the customs. So I had to sit there in the post office and hand write my address 114 times, and the weight, that all had to go into little boxes, the weight, what was in the package, over and over again. And that was, oh my God, my wrist by the end of that.
I can't even imagine.
But I was like, well, I'm here now. I might as well do it.
Right. And once it's done, right?
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, obviously everything we've been talking about, we're going to have links as you scroll down, which everybody should be used to now. But before we break, one of the things I also like to find out, Willow, from creators is what you love, at least right now. So talk to me about something that you have been consuming and loving. So it might be, a show you've been binge watching, or a movie that's really knocked you off your socks, or a video game, or another RPG. Is there something you can think of recently that you have just like, I love this and I want to do more of it?
Well, the same thing everyone else has been playing. I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring recently.
So I don't have it yet, right? And I'm not a Dark Souls guy, right? So please help me with this. So why is everybody like all over this game?
I think it's because it's so big. It's just so enormously big. Like I've been playing for 80 plus hours, and I went, right, I'm near the end of the game now. I'm going up to the top of the map. There's this little cave. I reckon if I go through there, I go through the little cave, and I come out on another Skyrim-sized map that has massive lore implications. And I think one of the things I really love about it is that the map itself has points that you can teleport to, these little bonfires,
right,
in Dark Souls type fashion, and that's about it. And it's all visual, and you can put your own markers on it, but you can't like write what's on the markers, and you don't really know what's there past this fantasy style drawing of a map. So you have to physically run around this enormous world and get a book or a tablet or something and write down what you see, and remember, like, okay, so there's a dude over there that wants me to find his servant, and he said his servant is in this place that I don't know where it is, but I know the name of it. So when I come across it, I'm sure I'll find the servant. And I don't know, the UI on other games is just, you get bombarded with these like hundreds of symbols and question marks because you haven't been to this area, and you go, okay, there's something there, I'll go there. There's something there, I'll go there. And then in this game, you have to. It's almost like playing an old ZX Spectrum game where you've got this huge map, but you don't know what's in it. You just got to wander around. Or playing Fallout even, because you get randomized, like original Fallout, you get like randomized encounters as you wander around this huge map. Or sometimes you don't, and sometimes there is a specific thing there, but you don't know that.
Right.
And I think that's what I love about it most. And also, if you're not a Dark Soulsy person, because obviously precision combat and feeling like you're struggling with a game is not a thing for everyone. But because it's so big, there's a very clear kind of difficulty curve, which the game itself has enforced. Not in a particularly great way. There'll be an extremely difficult enemy right outside the starting area, but also up in the top left is a really easy area that you're meant to tackle, and you're meant to ignore that enemy or run away from it because you feel like you're not meant to battle it yet. And I know a lot of people complain about that, but I feel like Final Fantasy, the old ones, kind of did this, where you'd wander into an area and it would just be incredibly overpowered. And you're like, right, well, I'm not meant to be here yet. But there's a random area over there that I haven't been to. And then, this area. And you can kind of do that. You get stuck on an enemy, you're hitting it, and you're only doing a tiny sliver of damage to it. And you kind of go, okay, I'll go off to this other area and explore it and find a boss that actually I'm really overpowered for now. And then I'll come back to this area after I've leveled up a bit.
Well, what's interesting to me about that, because I prefer it that way too, is this idea, because the other approach makes the game feel like it's meeting me as I progress, right? Whereas what you're talking about, I get the feeling the game is there, and I'm just part of it, right? And I'm part of that world. Now, so as a creator, obviously when you're consuming something like Elden Ring, there's got to be moments where you pull back the curtain a little bit and you go, ooh, that was very clever. So it's not that just you as a player consuming something, you see something, get a feeling for what was happening behind the scenes and how it got there. Is there times that's happened to you with this game where you've gone, ooh?
Yeah, so the FromSoft stamp is still there. In areas, so there'll be tight enclosed areas, and their trick that they run 100 times and everyone falls for it is, you come out of an exit, you see a very shiny, cool looking item directly in the middle of a wide open area, and you run straight up to the item and 4 guys come out from the shadows and attack you and kill you. And they do that over and over again, and people fall for it. I fall for it every time. And you start to see that after a while repeated, and you feel particularly quite clever when you go, well, I know that you're going to have a dude just around the corner, so I'm going to edge the camera around the corner, and oh, look, there he is, standing there, waiting for me to run at that item. And I don't know. That's like a mechanic that I feel in all FromSoft games, that once you start clicking, and even when you die, you'll get reset back. They do get reset back, and you go, right, I'm cleverer than you now. I know you're there.
Right.
So you can take on that environment. Yeah, and there's just things in this game that this game is not original in by any means, shape, or form. It's been done to death by hundreds of other games. It's just the simple aspect of taking away all of those UI elements and just leaving you to your own devices feels so fresh and original.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lesson, right? That sometimes stripping stuff away makes it fresh and new again. That's great. So Willow, obviously links, I said, to the games as they scroll down. But in general, Willow, if somebody wants to hear more about you, wants to interact with you more, where should they go?
So I've got an Itch.io where I post. I've actually got tons of small independent RPGs that are 1 sheet, 2 sheet, 3 sheet. And they're quite fun. I highly recommend Night of the Slasher, which is a really fun one. So the Itch.io is, I believe it's.
We'll link to it, but it'll be scrolled.
Okay, yeah, it's Neon Rot. I don't know if there's an underscore there, but it's called Neon Rot. That's my Itch.io. I just wanted to plug one more thing before,
please,
or talk about one more thing. So I'm making. Obviously, I've got a printing deal with Exalted Funeral now. And I've been kind of throwing stuff their way, and they're slowly bringing them out. And there's something I just wanted to talk about, because I feel like it's something that you personally would be interested in. But obviously, it's not going to be kickstarted. It's going to be go up on their website. It's a game called Below Dwelling Sewer Mutants, BDSM for short.
Okay. Nice.
Purely coincidental.
Oh, come on.
And it's basically Chud the game.
Interesting.
The old 80s horror movie. All the players play mutants, and the leveling up system in that. So it uses this pool mechanic where when you go out into the world, into this it's called the Undermuck, this sewer system which the GM kind of designs. They roll, the second they leave a safe area, they roll a certain amount of D6 dice, and then that's their numbers that they have rolled for the remainder of them going out till they rest again.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they have to use those numbers to go, right, there's a thing I can overcome if I get a 6, so I've got a 4 and a 2. So here we go. There's my 6, I overcome it, but now my 4 and my 2 aren't in my system. And there is combat, and the combat, you kind of... an enemy is always called prey, and whenever you defeat the enemy, the player who defeated it gets to eat the enemy, and none of the other players do, because it's a very kind of cutthroat system. Or they can share it with the other players, and then they rip a medium enemy in half, and it becomes 2 small enemies, and they then roll on a mutation table akin to that. So there's a medium prey mutation table, a small prey mutation table.
Interesting.
And they gain a random skill rather than choosing how they level up, which is added to their mutant. And those can stack. They can gain multiple of that skill. And at any point, if they want, they can rip that skill out of them to add a bunch of D6 to their pool to big up their pool, so they can carry on fighting, because they're physically ripping a weaker part of their mutant out of them.
Interesting.
So they get weaker in their skills, but they can then go for that a little bit longer. And it's kind of this randomized creation of character. Like all the descriptions of the skills have like bat wings, and then you just describe how your mutant grows bat wings suddenly, and they kind of rip out of them. So yeah, that's something that's coming out.
Yeah, you do know me, Willow, because all of that sounds really interesting to me. Really interesting to me. It so I've got to ask this. Like I'm trying to imagine. So whenever I hear about a new game, one of the first things, and this is just me, I don't know if anybody else does this, but the first thing I try to do is try to imagine play, and try to like, and like how the game is played. So I'd be curious, how are people playing this and playtesting? How are they wrapping around it? How are they finding their characters? What are you seeing in playtests that gets you so excited about this?
So I'm seeing a lot of cutthroat gameplay, which is kind of what I wanted, like a mute world. They'll see a large prey, and they'll go, I want to kill it first. So they'll throw all of their dice at it to try and kill it. And then they won't kill it, and then another mutant will go, well, I know you've weakened it now, so he'll only throw 2 dice at it and they'll kill it. And then there's a mechanic where the mutant who didn't get the prey can go, I want to fight it off you.
Oh, jeez.
Challenges the other mutant to a fight, and it's these squabbling mutants which you're then controlling as the GM.
Right.
Which creates this horrible world, which I really like.
Right. That's the idea, right? Is something that specific. That's very, very cool. We'll link to that as well. Damn it, I'm going to buy it. This is going to be a third game I buy of yours. I hope you're proud of yourself, Willow.
That's all right.
I really appreciate it. We're recording this on a Sunday. There's a lot of other things that are far more interesting to do on a Sunday, but you spent an hour with me. So I really appreciate it, Willow.
It was a pleasure.
I'm glad. And for those of you listened all the way to the end, I appreciate you too. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to Tabletop Talk and share it with your friends. Check out our content on YouTube and Twitch. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and stay updated on everything coming from Third Floor. All the links are in the show notes. Take care, floorheads.
Oh, hey. Are you still here? Wow. Well, the episode is over, but if you're bored, why not go to patreon.com and support the show for as little as $1 a month? Yeah, you can just scroll down and get the link. It's Patreon that makes this and all of our other content possible. Don't you want to join the other floorheads on the Patreon Discord? Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Take care. Bye.